Boa noite a todos. Good night to everybody. And we're very happy that we have this night together with us the members of the International March of the Living. So this is the first time that we make a lecture together with the March of Living International, and we welcome all. And this night, we're going to have the second lecture of a series, a special series that is about the Never Again. This was inspired by the people of the March of Living from São Paulo, Brazil. And as I said before, this is the second lecture. The theme of this night is Never Again, a broken promise, 50 years after the SHOÁ lessons from the 1994 genocide against Tutsis in Rwanda and the survivors' journeys. To share with us this theme, we'll have this night the lawyer Rloge Butera. Rloge Butera is very well known. He lives in Canada. He is a lawyer. He is a survivor of 1994 Tutsi genocide in Rwanda. He's the director of the Africa Center of Excellence on Children, Peace and Security member of the board for the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, and contributor to the March of the Living. Welcome, Rloge. We are very happy to have you with us this night. So I think this is a rare opportunity to listen to the stories of Rloge. And if you permit me, I just want to make in Portuguese and to say in Portuguese a few words to those that are joining and sharing with us this lecture em São Paulo, Brasil. Boa noite a todos. Como eu disse há pouco, nós temos o privilégio de contar também com a participação de membros da International March of the Living, que está abrangendo praticamente o mundo todo. Essa oportunidade é rara, ela acontece pela primeira vez e nós estamos muito felizes de poder compartilhar com a March of the Living esta idealização que foi feita pela direção da March of the Living do GENOCÍDIO de São Paulo, com o nosso Celso Zilbovícios e com a nossa Karine Guelka. O nosso convidado dessa noite é uma pessoa excepcional, é um advogado, Rloge Butera. Ele está altamente credenciado a tocar esse assunto. Ele é um sobrevivente do genocídio de 1994 e tem histórias incríveis para compartilhar conosco. Esse ciclo de palestras, que hoje é a segunda, visa justamente nunca mais esquecer e deixar muito bem acentuado o que foi o SHOÁ. E nós estamos trazendo alguma coisa, um genocídio, que foi aquilo que aconteceu em Ruanda com o povo tutsi. Meus caros, eu acho que a nossa idealização, aquilo que foi idealizado está atingindo plenamente os seus objetivos, e eu tenho certeza absoluta que o Rloge, nessa noite, vai nos esclarecer muita coisa a respeito deste triste episódio da humanidade também. Portanto, eu desejo a todos uma ótima palestra e convido o nosso Celso Zilbovícios e a Karine Guelka para que sejam os moderadores. Obrigado.
Boa noite a todos. Obrigada, Abrão. Eu queria dar as boas-vindas, dizer que estamos todos muito felizes de ver os amigos aqui, todos que já estiveram com a gente nessa empreitada, que é participar da Marcha da Vida. I would like to thank Rloge for being with us tonight, for your generosity in sharing your story, which we know so little about, and which is so important as part of the story of humanity. Thank you very much. Celso?
Well, good evening, everybody. Good evening, Rloge. Welcome. Although it's virtual through the computer, but welcome to Brazil. And I would like to thank you so much for being with us. And I want just for a moment to let everybody to know how I met Rloge for the first time. Unfortunately, this year we didn't have the March of the Living in Auschwitz, and the March of the Living International made a wonderful ceremony in the computer, and Rloge was one of the speakers during the ceremony, and I got very touched with his words, and I really wanted him to come to Brazil and share with us his experience, his capacity of surviving, the resilience, and his memories. I think Rloge will tell you about the story, and everybody will have the opportunity to make also questions. I would like to tell you, everybody, that you have to use the Q&A down your screen to make questions. Do not make any questions through the chat, only to the Q&A. Okay? Thank you so much. Eu queria só avisar a todos que querem fazer perguntas para usar o QIA que está abaixo na tela e não usar o chat para perguntas. Nós estaremos então fazendo. Rloge, you have the word. Thank you for coming, and we have really a great honor for us to have you here with us.
Thank you very much, Celso, Karina, Brau, Isaac, who you all can see behind the scene, and thank you everybody for having me in your homes this evening as we have this conversation about in the context of the March of the Living. It's a powerful and important organization to our community, the Jewish community, but to the world in the kinds of lessons and reflections that we have to carry out every year. I've been very honored to be part of this journey for many years here in Ottawa, in Montreal, and in Winnipeg. And I myself had the privilege of going on the March of Remembrance and Hope, the university version of this program, in 2007 through Germany and Poland, to go in the same path and to learn the enduring lessons of the Shoah from this very important and rather sacred place where millions, over 6 million Jewish people repose. I am grateful to March of the Living International. I understand that we have colleagues joining us in New York in addition to Brazil, but I also am very thrilled to be invited to Brazil. Unfortunately, the first time via the internet, it's the first step. I grew up in Rwanda, and there, probably like in Brazil, football is a very important pastime, and obviously Brazil get the advantage of having the same colors as Rwanda, so I don't need to change my jerseys too often, and I'm still a fan of this very important tradition of your other home. I will take a few minutes this evening to share with you my personal story of living through and surviving the 1994 genocide against the Tutsis in Rwanda. I will take a few minutes near the end of that process to really discuss with you two critical lessons. In the background of COVID, of the international challenge of things like climate change and global peace and security that is shaken and threatened by so much and too many changes. What is our responsibility as Jews, as people who carry the legacy of this sinister event? What is our responsibility? What is it that we must do? Learning and reflecting on this past 8 years ago, 26 years ago, and unfortunately, even today, where mass atrocity and violence, identities are weaponized for the purpose of persecution and extermination. I was born in Rwanda in 1983. My father was a medical doctor, and my mother worked as a social worker and as an office assistant in different government departments. And I am the firstborn with two younger siblings, Sandrine and Shema, who are now grown and parents in their own right. But before 1990, we lived a rather quiet life, at least it looked quiet to us children, where our biggest worries were how high were our grades and how fast we can learn and be joyful in what was a simple life in different villages and towns where my father would be moved to serve. I had a dear friend, Samuel, with whom we played around, goofed around, destroyed toys or two, and he eventually became my first grade teacher because I would spend so much time with him, and by the time he finished grade 1, I was good enough to join him in grade 2 without having to take that year behind. And he is obviously a very important symbol in our lives for reasons you'll hear in a second. I named first child after him because unfortunately, unlike me, he was not able to make it out of this genocide. In 1990, things changed for Tutsis in Rwanda. For 30 years prior to that, since 1959, the first and second republics in Rwanda were constructed around Hutu power, identity-based politics of persecuting and dehumanizing Tutsis for the purpose of consolidating support. The Hutu power ideologues came up with ideas of keeping Tutsis out of schools, keeping them out of decision-making processes, and would run massacres in different regions to intimidate and keep them under pressure. People like my parents would be moved from one end of the country to another, thing to destabilize and uproot them on a routine basis. But it was until grade 2 when I discovered that the process of dehumanization went deeper, when my second grade teacher would come in with an unusual roll call. She asked that the Tutsis in the class would stand up. I had no idea what any of that meant, and she picked me out to stand up along with 4 other colleagues of mine, and she went on to tell us that Tutsis were responsible for all harm that has ever befallen to Rwanda, and that we were subhuman cockroaches and responsible for so many untold crimes. I was offended and hurt, and I ran home. I asked my parents what to do the next time this happened, and they told me that I was Rwandan first and foremost, and the next time she asked to stand up, I should stand up, but I shouldn't give credence to those hurtful words that she was discharging. Soon those words left the benches of our classrooms and were disseminated publicly to the masses through public media, radio primarily, in order to prepare Rwandans for what was to come, the 1994 genocide. On April 7th, the morning it all began, our house guard came to us and woke us up and asked us to run away immediately, because a squadron of armed militias were going house to house, killing every Tutsi they could find. Relative of my father, who lived not too far from our home, had already been killed along with his 3 children. So we took the only clothes we could reach and ran out, never to return to our house until much, much later. We tried to hide in bushes nearby there, and it was obvious that the genocide would not stop. It wasn't a short incident. We sought shelter from our neighbors who would not take us, although some of them would take the opportunity to seek medical advice from my father, yet not offer shelter or help for his family. And then the UN mission that was supposed to be protecting Rwandan, also, at least when we reached their compound a few kilometers away from our home, they too would not take us. And we continued our journey for at least another 2 days, until a massacre in a place called Gahanga near Kigali, where my mother and sister were separated from 3 of us, my father and my brother, who were saved from that massacre and able to continue hiding. And then my mother returned near home, where she survived separately. We walked for 7 days, about 161 kilometers. I was 10 years old at the time. My brother was about 7. And my father would carry us when he can and bribe people to prevent them from killing us, and buy some food and water until we reached the town of Nyanza, my mother's hometown, where at the time the genocide hadn't started when we got there, around April 14th of 1994. Unfortunately, a few days later, my father was among the first people to be apprehended and killed in Nyanza, and my brother and I were taken in by a Hutu family that managed to hide us for the remainder of the genocide. And during those 100 days of pillaging and violence and rape and murder and all brutal crimes that were carried out in Rwanda, I was witness to some of the darkest side of human penchant, the ability to look at your fellow humans with indifference and accept their attempted and total annihilation. I vividly remember not only the scenes of violence I was a witness to, but also the reactions of the people who were around us in response to that violence. To give you, I guess, a higher view picture, the genocide in Rwanda lasted only 100 days. And in those 100 days, over 1 million, been able to identify at least 1,060,000 people who we could name who were killed, but over 1 million people were killed in 100 days. That's over 10,000 people every single day during that time. and most common method of murder was a machete. It was a very intimate process of total annihilation. And as the time goes by, we discover that none of this was spontaneous or an accident. A plan to distribute radios, to distribute machetes, to draw lists of Tutsis and where they were located and who would belong to their family, and then a campaign and sustained campaign to mobilize the killers to go out and search them, including naming people by name and exactly who is killed and who's left for people in the neighborhood to search them, were all well crafted and well executed by killers. And in the words of Professor Cutler, the world knew this didn't happen in secret or in the cover of the night. The world knew, yet did nothing. We know that over 4 months before the genocide took place, the UN was briefed about the plans and the weapons being imported in Rwanda and their distribution. We also know that many countries who could intervene in the middle of the genocide dismissed that option, simply saying that it's only humans in Rwanda, no other reasons or resources to justify risking their own lives to save their human. But we know that in that depth of darkness, you could still see glimmers of hope. Hope like my mother, who returned to our home and convinced that she wasn't going to survive too many days in the rainy spring of Rwanda, gave her child, for all she knew, the only one who was alive, Sandrine, to our neighbor to hide, and they managed to hide her for the duration of the genocide, while she also survived 12 attempted murder. She was taken to the mass graves, and 12 times there would be some coincidence or confusion that would prevent her from being killed, to the very last person who came and asked her to choose a place in our home, where he took her and said, choose a place where you'll be shot because I've killed every Tutsi I met, so you are the last one. The moment she opened the wardrobe of her bedroom, the family album fell down, and the officer who was about to kill her recognized my father, who about 4 years prior, when the civil war had broken out, had been treated by my father, injured and slated to be amputated. So my father decided to save his leg, and this young man had been saved by a Tutsi, yet going around killing several, and recognized my father, so chose to save my mother's life and told everybody that she had been killed, and that's how she survived. The genocide ended because a group of young men and women, Tutsis mostly, called the RPF, took control of Rwanda and vanquished the government that was carrying it out. After the liberation by Rwandans, a long process of reconstruction and attempts at reconciliation and other efforts ongoing inside Rwanda and between Rwandans. And unlike the SHOÁ, most survivors have to live next door to the families and the actual people who took the lives of their loved ones. So in my younger days, very much from the time the genocide ended, close to when I was 11 until I was 17 and moved to Canada, I had a first-hand witness of Rwandans' early effort at rebuilding a country out of the ashes of the genocide of the Tutsis. And when I came to Canada, my head was full of many questions. How is it possible that people who speak the same language, who for all intended purpose look almost the same, who share religion, who share schools, who share communities, can overnight turn on each other, and a patient can turn on his doctor for his total annihilation without regards to his future sickness or any future losses that they may have. How in a society where everyone is so religious, every single religious community stood out and endorsed the government that was out massacring and murdering its own people. How is it possible that the world would look on idly by 50 years after the Shoah, when the promise of never again was being broken again and again? And how do you preserve the memory of the people like Samuel, my beloved childhood friend, who along with his family went hiding into a school in southern Rwanda, in Nyanza, Gikongoro, and then when we were looking for his body to be properly buried, we were told that, like many young people, he ran away, and when he was caught to be murdered, he apologized and asked the killers to forgive him because he will never be a Tutsi again. Those heartbreaks and those impossible questions came with me to Manitoba, Canada, and there, although many few people had never heard of Rwanda, a small community of Shoah survivors had known the trauma and the terror of being target of total annihilation. And that bond not only allowed me to find the voice and the words to actually speak the unspeakable, the crime of all crime that is genocide, but the tools to find meaning and a purpose to pursue what the Torah called justice, tzaddik, tzaddik, tirdov, to seek a world where maybe in our time will make genocide difficult, if not impossible, to carry out unchallenged, undenounced. So from my mentors like Philip Weiss, or especially like Robbie Wiseman in Vancouver, we did a lot of work in Canada to educate young people about the devastating consequences of hate and indifference. We also did a lot of work to confront the historic injustice of our own society. Very much like Brazil, Canada has a very sinister history and legacy with its indigenous people. And for over 100 years, we sent their children to residential schools where they were brutalized and tortured and abused in ways that are still having consequences multiple generations later. So we carried our voice and our witness as a light to shed in some of the dark corner, not only of our past, but of the countries that had adopted us and gave us a home. In 2007, I started legal education, and I eventually became a law graduate and worked in politics and government to try to change the course of government in doing the right thing. And today I have a special mission to build the first Africa Center on Children, Peace and Security, in the hope to end the use of children to carry out war and violence on that continent, which was founded by General Romeo Dallaire, who you should all look up and learn about, who was a very important person in standing up for Rwandans and Tutsis in Rwanda when so many around the world would not heed cause. So very much, so many people have pointed out, Elie Wiesel and so many others, that for a genocide to be possible, you need a sustained campaign of dehumanization. You need a plan, which the Hutu extremists had, and it's been documented that they actually went to Europe and inspired themselves of the Nazi propaganda campaign and other tools to actually be able to implement their so-called apocalypse solution. And you need so many good people to be indifferent and bystanders when the worst is taking place. So as we look around us in this world that is changing, in this world that is filled of grief and lockdowns and turmoil, we still need to ask ourselves two important questions. One is, what do we do? Especially those of us of Jewish tradition or any other faith tradition. Now that we know better, what do we do when we confront injustice all around us? How do we stand up? How do we choose not to be bystanders? But we also need to question a passion for identity that seems to have consumed so many society around us in ways that are not always healthy, in ways that are not rooting us in a sense of responsibility for action to make the world better, but in a destructive distraction that is where you focus on all the wrong things. In the meantime, we also need to decide where we look when we know of the Uyghur inside China or the Rohingya near Myanmar, where other human beings today are systematically targeted for the purpose of violence, for the purpose of control and annihilation. One of my mentors, Professor Akavan, always says that genocides are not accidents. They're not like tsunami. They're man-made disaster. And as such, we have a very important and moral responsibility to do our very best in our attempt to stop them, or at least to challenge them as they're taking place. So, like you, we do have a special legacy of knowing full well what it is like to be the object of total annihilation. And knowing that, we do need to take that responsibility and that legacy and transform it into action to truly honor the memory of those we lost in this sinister and sad event. Let me stop here and take your question. I appreciate your time, and I'm grateful for the moment you've taken to listen to me. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much. It's very generous of you to share your story with us. I would like to ask you about your meeting with the Jewish survivors when you went to Canada. How do you think their survival experience helped you in your experience, and how was this friendship that happened between you? What was built between you and the Jewish survivors?
Thank you, Karina. When I moved to Winnipeg, Manitoba, there were very few people from Africa, and even fewer people who knew where Rwanda was or what had happened there. And then in my first year of university, shortly after, I was blessed to meet my professor for introduction to religion, Dr. Rloge, who was the rabbi of the conservative synagogue in Winnipeg. And through him, I met his wife at the synagogue. And the first time we were having lunch, she asked me, "You're from Rwanda?" I said, "Yes." And they said, "Have you heard of Elie Wiesel?" I said, "No, I have not heard of Elie Wiesel." I said, "You should look him up." So I go home, I forget about the conversation, and the next time I meet Carol Rose, she said, "So what did you think of Elie Wiesel night?" I haven't read Elie Wiesel, but that night I went home, borrowed Night from the library, and I couldn't sleep until I finished the very last page. And then I went to the library. I found that he didn't only write Night, he wrote so many other books. And I was struck by the fact that so many traumatic events that I had been witness to, but were so gruesome and so painful to describe, he had put pen to paper and named the crime of all crime, that of genocide, and the detail of how it happened by singling out Jewish people all over the world, really, and targeting them for annihilation. But soon, shortly before I was with Rabbi Rose, I had also run into Izzy Asper, who was a very passionate advocate on Shoah remembrance, who once told me that you should bear witness of what you lived through, because it's easy to go into the abstract about 1 million lives lost and forget that to each one of them there is a name, there is a story, and there is a memory that we all struggle daily to hold on to and to nurture in ourselves so that we can be and do better. So this relationship not only provided me with the first people who could really relate to the kind of violence and hatred I had witnessed, but later, especially with Robbie Wiseman, as we traveled across the country trying to educate and advocate for justice and human rights in Canada, companions, where our suffering would not cripple us or force us into silence and resignation, but it was a tool and a fuel to go and confront. The first time we went to do a public lecture, it was in southern British Columbia, where a number of white supremacists had set up camp to recruit young people from high schools into their movement of neo-Nazi, racist, and the likes. And our message resonated with those young people and gave them a great deal of hope and encouragement that the suffering we experience in all our journeys should not debilitate us, it should inspire us, but that it also gives us a responsibility to challenge and be a check on the conscience of our humanity and our societies when the unthinkable is happening, even in slow motion, even in small, relatively banal incidents that we rather look away and ignore in our own way. I remember in the case of Indigenous Canadians, when I was first learning English, and I went to my teacher and asked them, what is this business of singling them out on our paperwork and our identities? And he told me that, well, in a polite company, the issues of Indigenous Canadians should never come up because it's politically incorrect. That kind of comment to Robbie and me was obviously fuel to remember where we have been and what we need to do. And in 2007, obviously, having been part of this community, I made an important decision to convert to Judaism through the Reform congregation here in Montreal. So my family and my kids chose and do live a Jewish life, and this tradition, I think, has been not only a source of hope and encouragement, but a home to actually be able to live our tradition in ways that has sustained and nurtured so many millions for now almost 6,000 years. Long answer.
Well, Rloge, it's a very, very strong history. You have quite difficult memories as the Jewish people. And we know that you decided after this experience with survivors to convert to Judaism. So it's a very, we feel it's a great honor for us to have you among our people. And what do you feel now as a Jew sharing these memories with the Jewish people? And as you said, after 50 years of the ending of the Second World War, how do you feel today the work of memory as a Jew for the Shoah and also as the Rwanda genocide?
Thank you. It is a very important question because we are living in a very particular moment where everybody, it's not only our community, it's everybody, is stricken by this fever of identity. And who is a Jew? What is a Jew is the live question of our time, and many in our community are struggling with that and the implication of all of that. And having chose the covenant with our people, it's very clear to me, at least, that to be a Jew is to have this responsibility to stand up for justice, to stand up for the light in a society that from time to time find its shadow of darkness and dispense incredible violence. And that these events of the Shoah or the genocide of the Tutsis or other genocide we are witnessing in our times are not things that are happening out there, either in a too distant past that we could afford to look away, or to people in distant places that we will never be. It's events all around us where hatred is normalized, where you see, and I don't have to tell you, the rise of anti-Semitism and the violence we are witnessing in parts of Europe and North America, and I'm sure elsewhere in the world. It is a responsibility to really go and touch at that core of our belief that we do not only struggle in an abstract sense, but struggle in a real sense to pursue justice, to really stand out when it's necessary in response to dehumanization and other lessons that we know all too well. But it's also a very hopeful time. I've been to Israel, was there in December, been there for so many times that with its imperfections, there's also hope. As many of you will be able to see when you go there, that it's pluralist in its diversity and its hope to remain Jewish and democratic. We all hold and share that responsibility to not only have that personal responsibility to be a beacon of hope and justice to the world, the hope, Hatikva, the hope of Israel, also remained that bright for the rest of the world, which doesn't mean it's without fault or imperfection, but it means that we struggle every day, like our forefather Jacob, who became Israel, to actually be that beacon for the world. I chose the name Hillel when I converted because I think his message to be, if you are not for yourself, who will be for you? But if we are only for ourselves, what are we really? And you can't lose sight of those dual and very important pillar of who we are, very diligent and conscious of where we are and what is important to us, but also conscious of where we are and what is important to the world and the world we want to build.
Wonderful,
So,
wonderful. So a wonderful answer. Wonderful answer. Karina, we have some questions from the audience,
yes.
so you can begin with the first one.
The first question we have for you, Rloge, is, did you ever see the teacher that stood you aside again? And I would also ask, how did you feel about this moment when you saw your teacher, who was supposed to be a reference, a model for you, putting you aside?
The poor teacher, I haven't seen her again. And the context of what she was doing at the time was very simple. It was mandated government curriculum. They would try to actually get Tutsi teachers to be the ones teaching that lessons, to make sure that it strikes home in an even more violent way. And it pales in comparison to the actual events of murder and sexual violence and others that I was witness to, and I was unfortunately old enough to see and remember everything, and too young to be of use to anybody. But the reality of Rwanda and its forceful efforts of reconciliation is that millions of people had a hand indirectly, and most of them directly, in this genocide. To actually kill 1 million people, mostly with the hands, you needed to mobilize thousands and thousands on the streets to be out carrying this out. And it's estimated that 1 in 10 people you would meet today in Rwanda may have some links or another to this history and this past. So it's a very dark place that a lot of people, like my mother, who were older then, who lost her own mother, so many of her siblings, her own husband, had to confront that challenge and make a choice of how you live in a country, how you build a society that is not going to slide very quickly and very easily into this past. So Rwanda national policy of reconciliation insisted that we are all one people, that we needed to put behind us the identities and the labels of being Tutsis and Hutu, and that we needed to cultivate a very patriotic identity that seems to have been paying its dividends. 26 years later, it's the fastest growing economy on the continent. As I was describing before everybody joined us on the call, they managed to cope better than pretty much everybody in sub-Saharan Africa with COVID, with only 5 fatalities in the last 6 months. And it comes with a price, and the heavy price is that there is a limit to the demands of justice that survivors can make in terms of accountability and direct accountability. And on the other hand, the people who belong to that Hutu majority need to make a commitment not to return to the ideas and prejudices that led us there. It's very tough, it's very painful. It's very painful in April when you have to relive those memories and you have to walk and meet the neighbors who were there when it all was happening. It's painful to be searching for the remains of our loved ones to give them a proper funeral, which is still happening to this very day. But Rwanda is finding its way to cope and find new sources of resilience and focus to really live and survive next door to people who could and are capable of the unthinkable.
I will quote this question, Rloge. The world knew and didn't do nothing. How do you see today this doing nothing? And how do you feel that could be done that time? And how do you define the human being after all these genocides like the Tutsis and the Jewish people and so many others, like so many creations and wonderful attitudes also created by the human being? How do you define today after experiencing that?
It's today doing nothing looks like and one step back is that these crimes of genocide in a way political crimes. You had people choosing to pursue an agenda of a superior nation and a pure nation, an agenda of a total solution to making people the problem, basically. And we see attempts at making human beings, fellow human beings, a problem that are very difficult to live with and contend with. So we see in the extreme form events like what is happening with the Rohingya, where they're being pushed out of a whole province of Myanmar, or more recent days, what's going on with the Uyghur in Xinjiang, China. And at the very least, indifference is a problem. As Jews, as survivors, we can't afford to be indifferent. We can't afford not to know. And then when it comes to doing something, it's a combination of public and political engagement, but also a combination of really using different levers of influence and ability that we have to to do and respond at different levels where it's appropriate. I could name, in the case of Rwanda, people like a number of UN troops who had no authorization or guns, and who had actually been ordered to leave Rwanda and disobeyed that order, who just stood guard in front of locations and able to save dozens of thousands of people from certain murder by just sheer chutzpah to put their body between them and the would-be killers. It's obviously, thank goodness we are not always demanded of that kind of sacrifice. But what are the little steps of things that are happening from afar and that are happening up close that we can actually take on and choose to change and choose to affect in a way that is consistent with our values, that is consistent with our history. And I hope that from the march and the lessons we get to draw from this violence, and if you watch my speech, I was struck not only by the industrial scale, although if you look in Sinjar, the business of industrial scale to carry out mass atrocities back in vogue, but the small scale of villages, of these people who are locked out from the world and were targeted by this ancestral group and executed in the same manner that I had witnessed in Rwanda. So there is no gap between the first world or third world, the type of abilities or opportunities to do these types of crime, but there's always a need for a commitment by those who are willing to challenge, to even ask the questions of our leaders or those who have the powers to be changing attitude, changing behavior, and ultimately saving lives. Because in the words of General Romeo Dallaire, all humans are humans. None are more worthy or more human than others. So they obviously deserve our care and compassion. And as Jews, we have this added obligation that he who saves their lives saves the entire world. So we, of all people, can't look away. Even if the entire world is looking away, we get to choose to face those realities.
Rloge, we would like to know what's your understanding about the work of the International Criminal Courts regarding Rwanda?
The International Criminal Courts, the ICTR, and its legacy mechanism were very important, like the Nuremberg trials, to focus the world's attention to the leading masterminds of these events. A few weeks ago, one of the financier of the propaganda radio and the importer of these millions of machetes was apprehended and arrested in France due to be transferred to the ICTR international interim mechanism. As a survivor, it's a very difficult question because you obviously know that there were way more than the 98 individuals who were fully prosecuted and tried in the according to the Western international standards of penal proceedings. In 2001, when we had in Rwanda over 200,000 Hutu extremists accused of having carried out a genocide, the estimates were that it would take 200 years of trials to bring them all to justice. So changes and innovations had to take place, and Rwanda took the path of the Gacaca Court's proceedings, which are a modified process of an old small claims property dispute resolution adapted to the scale of, obviously, the ultimate crime of genocide and it required the communities to sit around to listen. They had to invent special chambers to manage sexual violence crimes, which have an added level of trauma and stigma. For many Rwandans, it's very clear that the international courts were important in that they needed to put on the record the world's condemnation of these individuals. They needed to put on the record and to put evidence to the test about this genocide, so that people don't go around saying you really can't really know, it's not this, it's not that. So there is an important role in challenging denial, challenging indifference, in actually validating the world's and the humanity's condemnation of this behavior that is the contribution of the ICTR, like the ICTY. But the lacune is a French word. I'm sure there's an equivalent in Portuguese. Lacune, lacuna.
Lacuna.
Yeah. Are very serious because obviously the level of justice administered is nowhere near what is really fair in this type of case. So we have to live with that. And what ended up happening is that the jurisprudence from those courts is now forming the basis of what we have with ICC. And ICC, International Criminal Court, has a whole other sets of problems that are political in nature, some of which involve the State of Israel. So there's another level of controversy that we won't go into this evening, but when I'm back in Sao Paulo next year, we can get deep into that vortex. But there is obviously some merit in attending to the fact that you don't go around carrying out mass atrocity with no consequence. And if the world can stand and voice that, it's obviously a positive thing.
We have another question here, Rloge. Did your mother go with you to Canada, and how did she react when you've decided to become a Jew?
That's a very good question. No, she did not. In 2001, when I left, and it was at the beginning of these Gacaca courts, it wasn't obvious that the outcome would be positive. There were clear threats and menace against survivors that she basically put together her savings and sent me the farthest way she could send me alone at 17. So very familiar reality for many Jewish mothers, unfortunately. But she stayed in Rwanda. And a few years later, she started this NGO that serves women victims of violence. First, survivors of the genocide who had experienced sexual violence in the genocide, and then survivors of domestic violence writ large in Rwanda. Today, they have over 1,500 individuals associated with the organization. So she's been a very powerful advocate and a powerful influence on me in her work to really end gender-based violence. But she also is very religious, is Christian. She believes that she was saved to do something important with her life. With 12 attempted murder, you can, I think there is good reason to believe that. So when she came here a few years ago, when we went to temple on high holidays, and she was able to meet the community, the rabbi, attend Nidre services. It's a very intense set of contradiction. On one hand, she's living firsthand a very biblical tradition that is still alive for a very long time. On another hand, she's not quite comfortable with my relationship with Jesus. So I always remind her that Jesus was also Jewish, which it's actually true. So between she and I am actually more practicing the same religion than she does. But I think to her it's important that I have a home that is rooted in a spiritual and religious tradition than it is to actually name and own a denomination, particularly given the history of Rwanda, where religious institutions actually failed a great deal by acquiescing or not standing up against the dehumanization and all the very clear and identifiable steps toward genocide. So she's not thrilled, but she also is fine with the choices of I have made for myself and my family. And I would
Wonderful.
say I would add she's more Zionist than many people at my temple.
Well, Rloge, unfortunately, we are just getting to the end of our meeting. We could be here much more time with you and hearing to your stories and feelings. You have wonderful things to tell us with your stories about your kids in Canada. But I would like to, this last moments of our meeting here, for your message to our community, to everybody. We are watching now important movements of the Black people as well, and all the injustice and violence. And after experiencing all this life, you are so young, you're 37 years old. What's your message for your kids and for the youth people, in not only in Brazil, but all over the world?
The first prayer we say every morning, the Shema, the very word about listen, listen to the world around us and look at what is happening all around us, is really the essence of the moment we are living right now, because the historical wrongs that we used to be told. You could, most of us see the fiddler on the roof, and can only imagine great-grandparents living through this. Yet today, it's happening left and right and center in different parts of the world to people who are not like us. But we can't afford, and obviously we know better, that it never ends with just the victimized and the targeted in the moment. It builds up in different contexts and for different reasons. So for the community in Brazil in particular, our hearts goes out to you with the crisis of COVID that you have to confront. That is a real challenge. In Rwanda, they were basically pointing out that what you can do to help is try to do nothing, which seclude yourself, stay away. It's going to be hard to live through high holidays on Zoom. It's not inconceivable that this year's CONTRA will be on mediums like this, but that is not a cynical outlook on the future. It's just a reality that our hearts is with you, that you cope and you survive this, like you survive other challenges. But that feeling this pressure is also another reminder that on things that are wrong in your home next to you, the same way as we do here, are your duty and responsibility to challenge and to question and to tackle. And then things that are wrong in the wider world, use the tools that are available to give the voice to the voiceless, give hope for those who are losing hope, and to give really stand in the fight for those who are looking to make this world better. They, especially in North America, there's injustice. The Americans have the Black Lives Matter. We do have a similar relationship, a similarly problematic relationship with Indigenous people as in Canada. It's very convenient to look away when their kids are overrepresented in prisons, in social works, and all those things. And in my day-to-day life, I do work in the Canadian politics and legal system to try to fix that. That is a Jewish thing to do. That is a survivor's thing to do. But you do fix those and tackle, obviously, really Hillel's message. The other challenge that are looking at you beyond COVID is also anti-Semitism that is not disappeared. So it's stay together and stay hopeful, because I think that is the one thing, the one work of candle light that we have the choice not to let go out. That if they try to destroy us, the last thing we can allow to happen is to lose faith, is to lose hope in humanity, because that's how we resist. That's how we carry on, and that's the message to our kids, is that although the worst has been possible, you can always stand up for justice, for hope, and for humanity.
What a nice answer. Rloge, no words for this wonderful. There is somebody here who wrote in the chat that if she was in the theater, she would stand up and yell, bravo, bravo. How lucky the world is, although everything you survived, how lucky the world is to have Rloge Butera. And how lucky the Jewish people is to have Rloge Butera to learn and to teach us so many wonderful things. Thank you very much. And Karina, will just thank you and say the last words.
So Rloge, I also thank you very much. It was very nice hearing your story. I think it really makes us think that the promise of never again was broken, and maybe it still is being broken. And I think that we need to choose on which side we want to be. What are we going to do with our stories, like you did with your story? What are we going to choose in terms of ethical and moral choices? And hopefully we will have a world where genocides won't be possible someday, but we have to all fight for that. So thank you very much for inspiring us tonight. And we hope to see you soon, maybe in Brazil, maybe personally with everybody here in this live. Thank you.
We'd like to thank everybody who came. We had a wonderful participation tonight, and we, on behalf of the Fundo Comunitário, our organization, our project Marcha da Vida in Brazil, and also on behalf of March of the Living International, we'd like to thank you so much for your wonderful words, for your wonderful message. Thank you a lot, and keep in touch.
We'll do that.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, bye. Bye, bye.
Bye, everyone.
Boa noite a todos. A gente gostaria muito de agradecer em nome do Fundo Comunitário do SHOÁ, do Projeto Marcha da Vida, e nós continuamos, então, o nosso programa de conferências, de palestras online. No próximo mês teremos mais um convidado. Muito obrigado e uma boa noite a todos.
Boa noite.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rloge.
Thank you. Bye, Isaac.